Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du fa'auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. The topic that I have chosen to talk to you today about is in itself a very interesting topic. Imagine if somebody who existed 600-700 years ago and he started talking about flying machines. What would be your natural reaction? Obviously, you will be, amazed by the idea that someone could envision something like a plane or a helicopter 600, 700 years ago. But now, what if I was to tell you that our Prophet, Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was shown these very times through which we are passing right before his eyes. And he explained it. They were recorded in the forms of Ahadith. What he saw, what Allah showed him. Some of the things which he saw were the modern day modes of transportation, such as trains, airplanes, the big ships, cars. But that's not it. He was shown much more than just these modes of transportations. He was informed by Allah the Almighty about the time when promised Messiah and Imam Mahdi was going to come in this world. What would the condition of the world be at that time? This has a term. The term is Atharul Qiyamah, signs of the latter days, or signs that would appear before the Qiyamat. Now, these signs which I'm going to be mentioning, non-Ahmadi Muslims believe that these signs would appear when the entire universe is collapsing, when life as we know it is coming to an end, when it's the end of everything. They think that these signs will appear exactly at that moment, which doesn't serve any purpose. But you will see when I start mentioning these signs that these signs have already been fulfilled. And they were pointing towards the fact that when you see these signs being fulfilled, that's the time when the Mahdi and the Messiah would come in this world. So the signs that I'm now going to share with you have to do with our time, the time of the promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam. So the second Khalifa to the promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, wrote a book which is known in our Jamaat as Invitation to Ahmadiyyat, or in Urdu it's called Dawatul Amir. Basically, the second Khalifa wrote a book addressed to the king of Afghanistan back in the days. And in that book, there is an entire chapter in which he talks about the signs of the latter days. He makes the case, he builds the case that look, the Mahdi, the Messiah that we've all been waiting for, was to come in this very time. Namely, this is the time of the promised Messiah Islam, and that Messiah and Mahdi is the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. But before making this case, he says, look, the signs have been fulfilled. So what I'll do is, I'll share those signs as he quoted them in his book. Since the notes, the book that is in front of me, are in Urdu, so I will read the Urdu passage and I will translate as I go along. Since there are quite a few of these signs, I will be going at a pace to cover as much of these signs as possible. And when I'm mentioning these signs, think about how they are being fulfilled right around you. Regarding the religious condition of our time, the Holy Prophet ﷺ was shown by Allah the Almighty. And he mentioned in his Ahadith, he says, उस वक्त मसीहियत का बहुत जोर होगा, that Christianity would be very strong at that time. Right now, it's probably safe to assume that more than a quarter of the entire world's population is Christian. So, even if we say a quarter of the world's population is Christian, it means that 1 in every 4 person is a Christian. And all the other religions and non-religious associations fall under the rest of the world population. So the hadith says that Christianity would be strongest at that time, meaning the Christians would be in greater numbers. चुनांचे मुस्लिम में रिवायत है कि क़यामत उस वक्त आएगी जबकि अक्सर अहले अर्ज़ रूम होंगे, और जैसा कि उलमाए इस्लाम का इत्तफ़ाक़ है, रूम से मुराद नसारा हैं. The hadith which comes in Sahih Muslim says that Qiyamah will come at a time when Christians will be in greater number. Now, of course, the Qiyamah which is referred to here is not the Qiyamah which is the end of everything, but rather what is mentioned here is the advent of the Messiah, the advent of Imam Mahdi, that when it will happen when Christians will be in greater number. Then the condition of Muslims was also foretold by the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So think about this. He says, उस वक्त मुसलमान जो होंगे, उस वक्त लोग कदर के मुनकिर हो जाएंगे. People at that time would deny the concept of predestination, that Allah Ta'ala is the one who controls the destiny of everything. People, namely the Muslims, would stop believing in that. And now living here in the West, in this century, in the past century as well, those of our youth, our scholars who are being raised in this Western culture, the culture where philosophy, is taught to them, that philosophy is taking the place of the religious knowledge which Islam is trying to inculcate in them. The result of which is that now these people, namely the Muslims, are denying different attributes of Allah the Almighty. Another symptom which has been mentioned is that log zakat ko tawan samjhenge, that Muslims of that time would consider zakat as a tax which is levied on them. They would consider this to be a burden. In other words, now spending in the way of Allah Ta'ala is considered a tax, it's considered a burden. And what do people do with taxes? Unfortunately, they try not to pay it. They try as much as possible to find some sort of a gimmick, some sort of a loophole where they do not have to pay the taxes. It's happening left, right, and center. And that's what Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned, that people would consider paying in the way of Allah Ta'ala, spending in the way of Allah Ta'ala as a form of tax which they would actively try to stay away from. When I myself as a missionary, I talk to people about, paying chanda the way they're supposed to pay based on the prescribed rate. Not that many people are doing it. Many people are literally trying to find ways so that they don't have to pay chanda, or they pay as minimal as possible. And the result of it is, of course, also in front of us. I've already talked about that topic in one of my previous Durs here at this Masjid. Another symptom which was mentioned is that the scholars of that time would sell the religion of Islam. Now we see this happening among the non-MD Muslim scholars, that for the sake of paltry price, for cheap fame sometimes, and at other times for the sake of, power or status among people's eye, and at other times for the sake of money, they're literally issuing fatwas which creates fitna in the Muslim ummah. What's happening in Pakistan? We have Muslims, so-called Muslim scholars, who are drunk and they're giving interviews on national TV talking about the importance of following Islam. That's the level of hypocrisy which was foretold by Holy Prophet ﷺ. The next sign which was mentioned is us zamane mein namaz tark ho jayegi. People would leave salat. People would not offer salat. We see this happen as well. We see so many people, not just the elderly, but the youth as well, who have given up on praying altogether. Sometimes the excuse is that I work, and because of my work I cannot pray. Sometimes the excuse is that I have college or university or homework, and because of that I do not have time to pray. And sometimes it's flat out, I don't believe in God. There are people, even among Muslims, who on the surface call themselves Muslims, but in reality their heart is void of any faith in Allah the Almighty because of XYZ reason. So we see this sign has also been fulfilled. Another sign which was mentioned, उस वक्त लोग नमाज बहुत जल्द पढ़ा करेंगे. चुनाचे इब्न मसूद रज़ी अल्लाह ताला अन्हु की रिवायत से अबू शेख ने इशात में बयान किया है कि रसूल करीम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने फरमाया कि 50 आदमी नमाज पढ़ेंगे और उनमें से किसी की एक नमाज भी कबूल ना होगी. Another sign which has been mentioned by the Holy Prophet ﷺ regarding our time is that people would try to offer salat as quickly as possible. I'm sure most of us have seen those videos that circulate around Ramadan time on WhatsApp, where they show somewhere in the Muslim world some Imam is leading Tarawih Salat, for example. And the dude is doing it so fast, like probably faster than the bullet train. I've seen those videos and it's literally making fun of Salat itself. Then you have people who boast that they can finish the entire Quran in a single night. Imagine how fast they must be reading it. And then you have the youth who come to Masjid, if they come to Masjid, and it's all about getting out of Masjid as soon as they can. Recently, in one of the classes that Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Ayyadahullah bin Aziz, takes on MTA with the youth, I think this question came up about Salat itself. And Hazur mentioned that nowadays you guys are all about offering Salat as quickly as possible. And Hazur actually said something in Punjabi. He said, now when it's time for Salat, you turn to your friends and you say, "Main 5 minutes ch aaya." That, give me 5 minutes and I'll be done with prayers and I'll be right with you. And then Hazur commented and he said, 5 minutes are required only to read Surah Fatiha. You barely finished Surah Fatiha. Think about it. Think about it. In every salat, how many times? And right now, don't even include the sunnah and the nawafil. Just the obligatory rakat. For example, take Fajr. Fajr has 2 obligatory rakat, right? In each rakah, you read Surah Fatiha. So Hazur says, barely in 5 minutes you should be able to finish Surah Fatiha, meaning you're contemplating on those 7 verses. So 10 minutes are just there in Fajr Salat just to recite and then ponder over the meaning of Surah Fatiha. And then the rest of the portion of the Quran and other postures is on top of that. But how soon do we finish our Fajr Salat? Now do the math for Zohr Salat. It has 4 obligatory rakat. In each rakah, you're supposed to read Surah Fatiha. That's 20 minutes right there. But when we come to Masjid, we're always in a hurry. How soon can we offer our prayer so that we can be on our way? Another sign which the Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned is that us waqt Quran uth jayega, meaning Quran would not be left among people at that time. It doesn't mean that we will not have the book of the Quran or we would not memorize the Quran or we wouldn't remember the Quran. It means Quran would be there, but its essence will not be there, meaning we will not be acting on it. Quran says, do not lie, people lie. Muslims lie. Quran says, do not commit fornication, do not commit adultery, do not look at things that are unlawful, such as, pornographic material. The youth are engaged in those things. Quran is very adamant, very clear that it says that there is no such thing. Do not indulge in, the girlfriend-boyfriend thing. Yet the youth is engaged in that. And you'll see some of the signs which are about to come, they're so detailed that you'll be surprised how Holy Prophet ﷺ was shown every single thing about our time. The next sign was, आखिरी ज़माने की निस्बत ये बात बयान की कि कुरान करीम से बेतवज्जही करेंगे, दूसरी तरफ इसके ज़ाहिरी सिंगार और आराइश में ऐसे मशगूल होंगे कि ज़री के ख़िलाफ़ इस पर चढ़ाएंगे. That on one hand, Muslims would not be acting on the teachings of the Quran. On the other hand, they would try to embellish the Quran. They would come up with craziest, most costly covers that they can find and wrap the Quran in that. But as far as practicing what is mentioned in the Quran, that's not going to be there. Next thing Hazur mentioned was, उस वक्त मसाजिद को आरास्ता करेंगे. Instead of having simpler mosques, they would try to make designs and they would try to make, they would try to beautify the mosque by creating flowers and trees and gold and different kind of ornaments and having next level chandeliers and whatnot. We see these things happen among Muslim places of worship, namely the masajid. Alhamdulillah, for the most part, our masajid, the Ahmadiyya mosques, are free of such things. Then the next sign was, उस वक्त अरब के लोग दीन से बिल्कुल दूर जा पड़ेंगे. That the Arabs would be far removed from religion of Islam altogether. Look at what's happening in the Middle East. Now, when we preach to the Arabs, they say, well, do you know Islam more than us? That's one of the most common, retort that they come back with. They say that, do you know more Islam than us? We're the Arabs. Holy Prophet ﷺ was an Arab. Quran was revealed in Arabic. It was revealed in the Arabian Peninsula. Do you know more Islam than us? Well, if you know more Islam, then how come you're not practicing it? And we're the ones who are practicing it. How come you're the ones who are taking lives for the sake of Islam, in the name of Islam? And we're the ones who are giving up our lives for the sake of Islam and in the name of Islam. As if the roles have been reversed. Then the next sign which the Holy Prophet ﷺ had mentioned, Hazrat Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu से रिवायत बयान की है कि उस वक्त लोगों के दिल आजिम की तरह होंगे और ज़बान अरबों की तरह. He says in those times, people's tongue would be like the tongue of Arabs, but their hearts will be like the hearts of non-Arabs. This was a phrase to explain that in that time, people would try to speak Arabic. But the religion of the Arabs, which is Islam, will be not in their hearts. We again see this happen. We see many scholars who try to speak Arabic, but their actions tell us that they are far from being a practicing Muslim whatsoever. I gave you an example of Pakistani scholar, so-called scholar, who literally gets drunk and goes on TV and gives interviews. And he's actually the leader of the Ulama Council in Pakistan, of the non-Ahmadis. And he's one of the staunchest, opponents of Ahmadiyya. Another sign that was mentioned is that उस वक्त अरब से मजहबी आज़ादी इस कदर उठ जाएगी कि वहाँ नेक आदमी नहीं हो सकेंगे. That religious freedom would not exist among the Arab nations. Look at what's happening in Aljazair. Look at what's happening in Saudi Arabia. Look at what's happening in the Middle East on the whole. That there is literally no freedom of expression. There is no freedom of religion over there. If you go to Saudi Arabia and you say that you're an Ahmadi Muslim, you'll be put behind bars. You go to Egypt and you practice your faith freely, you won't. Our Ahmadi Muslim brothers have been in prison in Egypt. Our Ahmadi Muslim brothers have been in prison in Aljazair. Our Ahmadi Muslims have been in prison in Saudi Arabia, so on and so forth. Look at what's happening in Saudi Arabia nowadays. They're not only going hardcore against the minorities, they're also going hardcore against anyone whom the monarchy considers as a threat against its own, hold of power. Their own religious scholars are now being put behind bars, and verdicts of death are being issued against their own scholars. Why? Because they say that the monarchy or the king or the crown prince are acting in cruelty, or that their foreign policy is not in line with universal human values. Again, exactly what the Holy Prophet ﷺ had foretold. Then regarding the Muslims of our time, the time of the promised Messiah and Imam Mahdi, Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned, उस वक्त फहश कसरत से फैल जाएगा, बल्कि तफाहुश कसरत से फैल जाएगा. लोग तफाहुश पर नाज करेंगे. It means that in that time, promiscuity, sexual promiscuity would be at its peak. And people would actually boast about such things. Do we not see this happen? Where you have this culture now, where college students or youth are saying how many girlfriends they have or how many people they've been with before they even get to the point of marriage. And they feel proud about these things. Not just the non-Muslims, but even among the Muslims as well. You see these things happen. The next sign which the Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned is उस वक्त शराब का इस्तेमाल बहुत बढ़ जाएगा. Alcohol would be consumed at a crazy pace, at a next level. Back in the days, you would see maybe 1 or 2 alcohol shops here and there, and that's about it. Now, you go to any mall, and you'll see at least one, alcohol shops where alcohol is being served or sold. Go to any restaurant. Most of the restaurants are serving alcohol. This hadith continues, and it gives another sign related to the consumption of alcohol. It says, "Us waqt raston mein sharab pi jayegi." At that time, alcohol would be consumed on the way. Let me give you an example. When you're traveling through an airport, now, when you're traveling through an airport, you'll see people sitting and drinking liquor. Now, there are liquor shops on airports. Dulles is not too far from here. I travel from Dulles all the time. And they have not just restaurants, but places where they actually sell just liquor. You go to LAX, you go to Dallas International, different airports, and you see this happen. Another sign which was foretold in the books of Ahadith is that gambling would become commonplace. Now there are so many different kinds of gambling. People gamble online, people gamble on another form of gambling is betting on horse race or cricket games or different sports. And then gambling itself is out there as well. If you were to look at how frequently gambling used to occur maybe 300-400 years ago and compare that with now, you'll be amazed. You'll be amazed how much gambling is taking place in our time. Again, fulfilling literally what was foretold by Holy Prophet ﷺ. Another sign was, उस वक्त नफ्स ज़किया मारा जाएगा, that you won't be able to find good, righteous people. Meaning they're not going to be that common. There was a time when in a single place you'll be able to find 100,000 Muslims who were God-fearing people, who were in communion with God. They would communicate with God and God would speak with them. And now you go out, and if you get lucky, maybe you might find one person among a million who would fear Allah Ta'ala. Another sign was, us waqt amanat uth jayegi, meaning people would become dishonest. We have people who literally take loans from other people, and when it's time to pay back, they try not to pay back. They try to find excuses. Just earlier today, I was reading an article where some lady had hired a college student, a college female student, as a babysitter. And they had a written agreement over text messages that this lady is going to pay her $16 an hour for every hour that this girl is going to babysit this woman's children. And, that girl spent 10 hours doing babysitting for this lady. And the next day she asked for money. And this woman had the audacity to say that, why are you asking me for money when you had free ice cream at my place? I'm not kidding you. I actually read this article earlier today. And then the lady, the college student, she shared screenshots of that online, which was part of that article, which showed this lady entering into that written contract with this person. And the excuse this person had is, I'm sorry, I delete my text messages, so I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know why you would be asking me for money. This is what the Holy Prophet ﷺ spoke about. People would become dishonest. I just gave you one example. There are so many examples of dishonesty that now exist in the world where we live. Another sign that Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned is that in that time, उस वक्त लोग माँ बाप से तो हुस्न सलूक ना करेंगे लेकिन दोस्तों से सलूक करेंगे. चुनाचे अबू नईम ने हुलिया में हुज़ैफ़ा इब्नुल यमान से रवायत की है कि उस वक्त लड़का अपने बाप की तो नाफरमानी करेगा और अपने दोस्त से एहसान करेगा. The Holy Prophet mentioned that one of the signs of that time would be that youth will become disrespectful towards their own parents, but they would respect their friends. How many of us, unfortunately, talk back to our moms or fathers? But when it comes to our friends, we show respect to them. Not the same level of respect is shown to our parents, even though they're more deserving of all the respect and honor from our end. Yet we reserve it not for them, but for our friends. I don't need to point any fingers. I don't need to tell you about this. This exists amongst us, where we want to spend time with our friends, but not with our parents. Same parents who did every single thing for us, they spent their youth working so that they could sponsor our education, so that we could get all the amenities of life, which makes our life simple, easy, luxurious in a way. But when the same parents grow old, we feel embarrassed introducing them to our friends. We try to, unfortunately, deal with them as if we're dealing with a maid or dealing with someone who is a beggar, unfortunately, God forbid. Another sign which the Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned was religious knowledge would decrease and secular knowledge of different kinds would increase. Again, we see that happen. Many people know about how to operate computers, how to use cell phones, how to code, so on and so forth. But if you ask them if they know the translation of Salat, how many of them actually know the translation of Salat? This is just a very simple example. Another sign that the Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned, he said, when Muslims will meet one another in that time, they will not be saying Assalamu alaikum to one another. Rather, they will have a way of greeting one another by swearing. Think about it. Holy Prophet ﷺ more than 1400 years ago mentioned this, that when the time of the Messiah and Mahdi will come, Muslims will be greeting one another by not saying Assalamu alaikum. They'll have another form of greeting one another, which will consist of using swear words. The yo culture is what this hadith is talking about. Another sign which has been mentioned, उस वक्त मुसलमानों में इज्जत बवजह दीन के ना होगी बल्कि बवजह माल और सियासी अमाल वगैरह की होगी. In that time, Muslims will not be respected amongst one another because of their good deeds or their faith, their religiosity, but rather they will be respected because of how rich they are and how politically strong they are. Look at that. Again, another sign that has been fulfilled. Another sign that the Holy Prophet ﷺ had mentioned was उस वक्त मोमिन जलील होंगे और लोगों के डर से छुपते फिरेंगे. That in that time, the believers, the true believers of Allah, will be considered as the lowest of the lowest. We are the Ahmadi Muslims who have accepted the promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam, the Messiah and the Imam Mahdi. The word mu'min in its truest sense now applies to an Ahmadi Muslim. The other Muslims have rejected the Messiah, the Mahdi. So they can be called Muslims, yes. But can they be called Muslims plus believers? The answer is no, because they've rejected the Messiah. So they can call themselves Muslims. But in the eyes of Allah Ta'ala, they're not the believers in the Messiah that Allah has sent. But we're the ones. We are Muslims as well as the believers in the Messiah. And look how the Ahmadi Muslims are treated in the world out there. This hadith is talking about exactly this. Another sign that Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned was, उस वक्त औरतें बावजूद लिबास के नंगी होंगी. In those times, although women will be wearing clothes, but it would appear as if they're still naked. This can have two meanings. Number one, that women would wear see-through clothes, which were non-existent in the times past. But nowadays, women are wearing see-through clothes. Here, I also want to address one point. Sometimes women, even in our Jamaat, wear see-through burqas. I mean, what's the point of wearing a burqa if it is see-through? And Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Ayyadahullah bin Aziz has also mentioned, don't wear such burqas that are literally see-through. And they destroy the purpose of wearing them in the first place. Another way you can look at it is how poorly women are dressed in our times, where certain body parts are literally naked. Maybe 60 to 70% or 80% of their body is naked, while only 10 to 20% of their body is covered. Again, this is a sign that wasn't fulfilled 200, 300 years ago, but it became fulfilled at the time of the promised Messiah Islam, in our time. Another sign, औरतें उस वक्त ऊंट के कोहान की तरह सर के बालों को रखेंगी. That women in that time would have buns on their head. Their hair would carry a bun. You know how nowadays even men try to have those man buns? They grow their hair long and then they try to, maintain it in such a way that you have those buns at the back. Women, it is mentioned that women in that time would do their hair in that fashion. Again, a sign which was not fulfilled before, but in our time, that sign has been fulfilled. उस वक्त औरत अपने खावंद के साथ मिलकर तिजारत करेगी. Look at this. That in that time, women would be doing business with their husbands. Again, I don't need to go in further detail in this, but you can see this happen. You see this happen all around you. These were the signs. The reason why Holy Prophet mentioned this is so that you can know, you can identify that when these signs are being fulfilled, know that that is the time for the Messiah, the Mahdi, to come from Allah the Almighty. And we believe that these signs, as they have been fulfilled, that Messiah and Mahdi has indeed come. The next sign that Holy Prophet mentioned was the same sign. One explanation that Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani gave is that women would be used to sell products. You know, you go outside and any billboard that you see which is trying to sell a product, you'll most likely see a woman on it. You look at any advertisement, you go to any place to purchase anything, and most likely you'll see women who are dressed up in a certain way, who are presented in a certain way before you, so that it entices you into purchasing the product. Women are literally used as objects so that they can be used to sell the products that the employer wants them to sell. Another sign which was mentioned, उस वक्त मर्द औरतों की तरह जीनत करेंगे और उनकी शक्लें इख्तियार करेंगे. In those times, men would dress up and act like women. Women grow their hair long. Nowadays, the youth also grow their hair long. Women pierce their, ears. Nowadays, men also pierce their ears. Women do not get facial hair. Men grow the facial hair. But nowadays, we see men not growing their facial hair just for the reason so that, I guess, they can look hip. But these were the signs that Holy Prophet ﷺ was shown by Allah the Almighty about our times. Then in another sign which was mentioned is that women would dress up like men. Imagine how a man dresses, whatever your vision is, right? However a man dresses, nowadays that's how women are dressing up. If you look at coats, blazers, jackets that we wear, right? Women wear the shorter version of that as well. So it is as if the roles have become reversed. Men have started to dress up like women, and women have started to dress up like men. And this is more visible in the Western world, namely USA and Europe, etc. Then Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned about different plagues that would wreak havoc on the earth, namely the bubonic plague, for example, Ta'un. At the time of the promised Messiah Islam, Ta'un hit, bubonic plague hit India and different parts of the world, costing millions of lives. God knows how many people died. Then in the books of Ahadith, it talks about world wars. It talks about, this is another interesting sign. उस वक्त एक बीमारी होगी जो नाक से ताल्लुक़ रखेगी, जिससे कसरत से लोग मर जाएंगे. That in those times there will be a specific illness which would be related to your nose, and countless people will die as a result of it. Do you know what that illness is? Flu, influenza. At the end of the First World War, 2 million people died because of flu. This was 100 years ago. Fast forward from then till now and see how many more people have been consumed by this illness. Holy Prophet ﷺ foretold a disease which would be related to one's nose. Look how apt the description Holy Prophet ﷺ provided. Then another description Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned was औरतें मर्दों से ज़्यादा हो जाएंगी, that women would increase in their number versus men. As a result of First World War and Second World War, in many parts of Europe and different countries, where men were the primary soldiers, when they perished, when they died, in those countries, their own countries, the ratio of women increased significantly. Significantly. So much of the hadith says, for 50 women, there will be one man guardian. When the First World War and Second World War happened, After these world wars, millions of people had died in Europe. So the result was that in Germany, for example, I'm giving you an example of one country, women would put up signs outside their homes that they're available for a relationship, so long as someone can take care of them and their children. Then I mentioned about modern transportations, how Holy Prophet ﷺ was shown the airplanes, the trains, and he explained how they would run. For example, in one place he mentioned that the mode of transportation of that time would be extremely huge, very big. And then he said it would eat and run on fire. It would eat and run on fire. In another narration, he said that on the side of those modes of transportation, there will be windows. There will be doors through which you can get in. When you get in, there will be comfortable sitting arrangements. There will be light bulbs. And these modes of transportation would run on fire. Think about your car. All the things that I just mentioned, they're found in your car. On the side of it, you have doors, you have the windows. It runs on gas, which literally becomes fire when you ignite your engine. So much so, it mentioned that on the front of it and on the back of it would be cloud, dukhan, cloud, smoke. When you drive your car, you see the smoke. In your car, you have, the lights inside the car as well. You have comfortable seating arrangements. Magnify it. Think about trains, right? Think about airplanes now. Exactly the same thing. So, Holy Prophet ﷺ also mentioned in those times, the longer distances would become compressed. If a journey required a year to travel, in that time frame, in our time frame, it would be covered in days. And the journey of days would be covered an hour. And the distance of an hour would be covered in minutes or a second, or a part thereof. Again, we see all those things happening in our time. The next sign that the Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned is the increase in the digging of gold. Another sign that Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned was increase in the dealing of interest. Go to any bank, apply for a credit card or a loan, and it will come with a specific interest rate. Enter any business, it will involve interest, unfortunately, in this day and age. Again, the way this prophecy has been fulfilled. Look, interest existed at the time of Islam's inception as well. But this prophecy is not saying that there will be a case here and a case there. It says it will be happening as if that is now the norm. And this is what I'm talking about. That interest is so commonplace now that it has almost become the norm of the day. Holy Prophet ﷺ then mentioned that Muslims will not have any real power, any real government. You do have Muslims who are running the governments, but they are not Muslim governments. And there are governments who are run by people who call themselves Muslims. Arab Spring was foretold. Look at this. He said, Sham or Iraq or Misr us waqt ke badshah ke haath se nikal jayenge. That the kings of these places, which are called Syria, Iraq and Egypt, would go out of the hands, or meaning the rulers would not be able to rule these places anymore. This is exactly what happened as a result of Arab Spring in our time. But go back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad, it happened at that time as well, where the Sultanate lost the power over these lands. Another sign which was mentioned was about the rise of Yajuj and Majuj, how they would be so powerful that no other nation on the world on the map of the world would be able to fight them. Who is Yajuj and Majuj? Yajuj and Majuj is literally Russia and the European nations, Europe and America. They are called Yajuj and Majuj. Even Bible has called them Yajuj and Majuj. And the very word Yajuj and Majuj means someone who uses fire to build weapons. This is an amazing thing. By we, I'm referring to United States of America, and I'm referring to Europe, and then also Russia, that these are the people who use fire primarily to develop weapons. And then these weapons are so strong that no other nation can withstand them, can fight them. Imagine Muslim countries running around with swords in their hand, going to fight USA or Russia or Europe with swords in their hand, and the opposite side has missiles or bombs or guns and atomic bomb. Atomic bomb is also mentioned. The increase of police force is mentioned. Think about that. The increase of police force and police brutality as a result of that. Another sign that the Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned was the sign of the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse. Again, this sign was explained in somewhat detail when I delivered my previous lecture on the signs of the latter days from the Holy Quran. And then other signs. There's so many signs. In one of the hadiths, Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned about the dish antenna. And the hadith says that a time will come when Muslims would be using big dishes to communicate with one another. Think about that. Satellite dishes or dish antennas. And it says in that time, they will not communicate with one another, meaning they will not communicate with their neighbors and so on and so forth. In other words, they will be watching cable TV and not know what's happening in their neighbor's house, if they're okay or not, so on and so forth. So there are so many signs. I just wanted to give you a brief summary of some of these signs so that you know that the time frame that we're living in is the time frame when Allah the Almighty was to send Messiah and Imam Mahdi. That Imam Mahdi came in the person of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani alayhi salatu wasalam. We're the ones who have accepted him. So after having accepted him, if there is no change in us, then we have not benefited from the coming of the Messiah. But after having accepted Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani alayhi salatu wasalam, if we have truly become closer to Allah Ta'ala, if our prayers are on point, if we feel that Allah Ta'ala helps us, He listens to us, He protects us, then we have benefited from the advent of the promised Messiah. I hope and pray that Allah the Almighty forgive us our shortcomings and bring us closer to Him and make us of those who are ever obedient. As Hazur Anwar Ayyadahullah Baris Aziz mentioned in his Friday sermon, that may we become of those who are ever obedient to the institution of Khilafat. Ameen. Wa akhiru dawana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.